Ladies and gentlemen, let me first of all greet Kinga Gál, who has just arrived, our member of the European Parliament in Brussels as well. Ladies and gentlemen, as the president of the Friends of Hungary Foundation, I'd like to cordially and respectfully greet you all. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and for allowing us to celebrate together with you the decree of our Hungarianness, our civilisational heritage, the Golden Bull, the Arany Bulla, that was published in 1222 on the 800th anniversary last year. The Hungarian National Assembly declared that the Golden Bull was an outstanding document of European and Hungarian constitutional legal development and is considered a precedent to modern age democracy. First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to Mr. Trócsányi, the chair, the rector of the Károly Gáspár University, who also represents us in the European Parliament. We are extremely grateful for him for hosting us in this wonderfully designed neo-Baroque building, the Károly Csekonich Palace, to have this conference to celebrate this Golden Bull Remember Days, and of course to first introduce our book on the Golden Bull. Sine praeteritis futura nulla, says the saying. Without a past, you don't have a future. But it is true also to the spirit of the place, the Genius Loci, the Golden Bull, because past that actually reaches into the present doesn't only influence our present, but our future as well. It provides a moral assistance to all Hungarians living in the world who are united in one empire of the soul, constituting one global nation, to proudly remember the past of their ancestors, our 1,000 years of Christianity and statehood. The purpose of this conference is to contribute to a shared thinking which would place Hungary's historic constitution, the Golden Bull, in the set of values constituting European constitutional, political, cultural, and civilizational legacy, and emphasizing its significance. It is the uniqueness of our language and culture that unites us Hungarians, wherever we should be living in the Carpathian Basin, be it in the Carpathian Basin or in the diaspora, anywhere. We are joined by the purpose of building on St. Stephen's legacy and the ideals of the Golden Bull to prevail and to be promoted with the help of the Friends of Hungary Foundation, who also enjoy the recognition, appreciation of their own country or their second country, who are an opinion-forming force and who are able to constitute a credible bridge between Hungary and the other people. We, who are part of Europe and that of the Euro-Atlantic community. Ladies and gentlemen, the significance of the Golden Bull is unquestionable, especially with the entry into force of the Fundamental Law of Hungary in 2011, which opened a new chapter in the life of our country. However, this year has another significance for us. It was in this year that we created the Friends of Hungary Foundation, with the participation of great people like Nobel Prize winner chemist György Nola, or János Bénagy, or Baron Vilmos Gelsey, investment banker, or biochemist Sir George Rada from the United Kingdom, Sándor Lámfalussy, the father of the Euro, Abel Lajta, American professor, brain researcher, or the Holocaust survivor Alfred Pasternak, Balázs Gulyás, the neurobiologist from Sweden and Singapore, and of course the Transylvania-born neurologist István Modi, or, for that matter, on the journalist from Switzerland, András Oplatka, or myself. I'd like to also emphasize my two excellent founders, members, who have their very own specific link to this day and to the Golden Bull. They are, of course, Eva Marton, world-renowned opera singer, and György Granasztoly, historian, professor. My excellent co-founder, Eva Marton, the artist of the nation, one of the most renowned dramatic sopranos ever in the world, who was elected Singer of the Year 3 times by New York Times, and who was also decorated by the Kennedy Center's Golden Medal in 2017. When he sings on the global stage, capturing the awe of the public, we can safely quote St. August, who said, "Bis orat qui cantat." Indeed, Eva Marton, in these cases, was praying twice for Hungary, double. Unfortunately, I cannot express my personal gratitude to my excellent friend, co-founder, Dr. György Granasztoly, historian, professor, world previous prime minister's envoy to Brussels and Luxembourg, who embodied the outstanding scientists and a dedicated community man. We, the founders of this Friends of Hungary Foundation, have undertaken to work in a value-dedicated but unbiased way to inform the community of the Friends of Hungary and the world about Hungary, about events to do with Hungarians in the world. Our news portals have millions of clicks, both in the English and German language, sharing news about the world, to the world, about us Hungarians. Our objective is to have nations that grow up with a healthy national European self-conscious, and for the world to recognize the merits of the achievements of this small nation. The foundation of the Friends of Hungary has several hundreds of cultural and Hungarian cultural and religious organizations in contact in 45 countries of the 5 continents. Therefore, we also reach more than 2 million people outside of the Carpathian Basin. We are often criticized, justly and unjustly. Our geopolitical situation, the historic events, and sometimes ourselves, because of being the stubborn people that we are, perhaps we inherited that from the Far East, that we always, first and foremost, respect freedom and not always seeking truth and justice in the most diplomatic way, might have contributed to this. Hungary was always famous for the very, very significant grey capital in terms of brain, grey matter. We have given so much to the world in music, in sports. We are one of the 10 most successful Olympic participants. Countless Hungarian outstanding academics, Nobel Prize winner, Nobel laureate scientists who have been able to influence sometimes global history. We are very proud that Hungary was the first countries in Europe to provide for the freedom of religion, perhaps on the threshold of the papal visit. It is important to mention that there's no other country, nation, people who have given so many saints, martyrs, people beatified, people who have sacrificed their lives for the Christian thought and for the values, like the Hungarians have. From our first king, Saint Stephen, all the way to Saint Margaret of Scotland, the line is extremely long. It is no coincidence that the Holy Father mentioned before he came that Hungary is the country of saints. It is our national characteristic that since our first king, Saint Stephen, we have had a lot of saints, exemplary people for the world, who who have served bonum commune, the public welfare of Europe. The most the most famous Hungarian of the world is Saint Elizabeth of the Arpad House, or who was one of the 5 children of Andrew II and Gertrudis of Merania. He has a very short life, but has left behind a great oeuvre. 4 years after his year, the Pope declared him a saint. May I say, it is by no coincidence that Saint Stephen was the first to dispel with the European practice and did not ask for a crown from the emperor, the German Roman emperor, but instead the Pope in Rome. In his work, István Széchenyi wrote that the true strength of the nation lies in the amount of academicians it gives. Here at this university, I find it especially important to highlight the significance of knowledge. As a natural scientist, I say that science is the force that is capable of changing the world alone, even if any other intellectual science, biological, basic values are being questioned along the way. It is mandatory, obligatory to acquire knowledge. The knowledge you acquire is public good. It is a public interest to spread that, to transfer that. I'm convinced that it is only a knowledge-based, innovation-based society that is going to be competitive in the 21st century, which is shaped by history. The true purpose of creative man is to with stepping stones for the path that the world, the nation is going to progress on. The success of the competitiveness of the European Union is not developing as we would have expected it. The exponential development of 20th century modern science following the Judeo-Christian traditions happened in Europe and North America, since in the New World also scientific life was created on the basis of the European basics. It is how North America became great. The objectives set in the strategy of Lisbon in 2000 were not implemented, which, in my opinion, along with several other contributing factors, has led to Europe losing its global economical positions. It's falling behind in comparison to its competitors. This process of several decades cannot be slowed, or we've not been able to slow it, to turn it around. The results have not happened, and nobody has been held accountable for this. I, as a scientist, as a member of the academic community, I have to say that we look with astonishment at the loss of influence of Europe, at the loss of its contribution to the global GDP, at the loss of the demography, which is all related also to the declining productivity. Quo vadis, Domine? Where are you going, Master? Asked Peter when he wanted to flee persecution and saw Jesus appear in front of him on the Via Appia. Peter followed him to Rome, where during the reign of Nero he died on the crucifix. There is a marble stone still preserving the foot imprint of Jesus in the church Santa Maria in Palmis. And the world, the Catholic tradition, looks on St. Peter as the first leader of the early church. Quo vadis Europe, we could ask the question, about 2 decades, almost 2 decades after the EU accession of Hungary. Is it possible that we will need a new Peter, a new European leader who is, in the moments of the information revolution, who on the creation of the artificial intelligence will be able to give a response to this new era, which will lead to a strategic awakening in which we'll see the European values, European culture, and tradition based on antiquity and the Judeo-Christian roots, as well as the ideals of Renaissance, all kept alive by sovereign nations forming the future of Europe. Please allow me finally to say a few words about our book on the Golden Bull. Judith Varga, in her celebratory speech and the closing words of the President of the Constitutional Court, incipit explicitus est, in this book. It is quite a curiosity that geographer, academician, member of the board of the Friends of Hungary Foundation, and the director of the Astronomical and Geosciences Research Institute prepared, especially for this publication, a map that had never existed before, which depicts Europe at the time when the Golden Bull was published in 1222. Also, Dr. Gábor Csüllök, who is prepared a special map of Hungary in the 13th century. Dr. János Módis, jurist, legal philosopher, professor, talks about the impacts of the manifestation of the Golden Bull. Dr. Ferenc Kulin talks about Bankban and the speech of Kölcsei in the book. Very rarely is Benedek Virág quoted, who in fact in 1805 published the Golden Bull in the Hungarian language. So the specific clause for resistance that reminded the Hungarians that 600 years earlier they had already fought for the possibility and the option to resist. We Hungarians have undergone a specific path of development. The Golden Bull allows us gives us a framework on our fight for our freedom, our sovereignty, the protection of our national interests from outside influence. It helps the world understand who we Hungarians are, where we come from, where we are headed to, what our role is in Europe, and what it is in the world, and where Europe is heading to. Dear guests, thank you very much for your honoring attention. Let me now ask Daniel Deme to introduce the speech by my good friend, the President of the Constitutional Court, Dr. Tamás Súlyog. Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to also thank you for this presentation, which is extremely rich in content. And as it was mentioned already, our next speaker is the President of the Constitutional Court, Dr. Tamás Súlyog. What is the Golden Bull telling us? Dr. Tamás Súlyog is teaching at the legal law faculty of the Szeged University since 2014, a member since 2016, a president of the Constitutional Court.
Honorable President, Honorable Rector, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, I do apologize for not being able to address everyone in person, but please take it that I'm addressing you all indeed in person. Although not in the letters included in the Constitution, but we have the power that represents the independence and power of the nation, including the rights and the rights of freedom that we aim to enforce. These are thoughts from Dezső Szilágyi, Minister of Justice of Hungary, who was unconditional supporter of liberalism in the Hungarian House of Representatives in the 19th century. Well, we often say that something is of eternal value, even sometimes the program lists of radio channels are described by that. So I wouldn't like to apply the same expression to his words, but indeed, and I do apologize for the simplification. I just want to give you an idea and an example. If I actually pick up the Constitution, the fundamental law, and I sit down comfortably in an armchair, well, that situation in itself doesn't protect me from an unannounced demonstration or for getting a rotten egg or a rock through my window. So what I'm trying to say is that law itself, however nicely written, however nicely created, it's not viable, or rather weak in itself, without legal practitioners. As much as it might seem trivial, well, it isn't. Until a few centuries ago, the Hungarian society was subjugated to kings rather than laws. However, 800 years ago, the first and to this day the most dominant segment of Hungarian legal history, the Golden Bull, was born. And if we look at the Golden Bull, we realize that in the past 8 centuries, many different things changed. For example, the format of exercising state power and the formats of exercising that power, and even we look at the sources of power differently than at the time. Some of the initial lines of the Golden Bull say that in the spirit of the Holy Trinity and unbreakable unity, it was made from the mercy of the King and God. However, the fundamental law of Hungary says that we recognize the nation-preserving characteristics of the Constitution. However, they are expressed by us, by the Hungarian nation. In the past 800 years, we created concepts such as nation, self-limitation of state power, or rule of law. And at least from the level of constitutional order, we erased concepts such as nobility or the king. Hungary and the world is changing, and with it, also the methodology and practice of exercising law is changing. And the dominant moments in history, whether positive or negative, all left a mark, not only on the framework of exercising state power or the constitutional order, but also on the community that created it, namely the nation. And whatever might have been a life-changing experience for a generation, well, the same thing represented the future of the next generation, and for us, it's only history. However, our struggles, our decisions will mean the future for generations that will come after us. And for them, our day-to-day lives, our struggles become history in the same way as the Golden Bull does and the people who created it. It becomes history, which on the other hand, determine the social order, the framework, the day-to-day reality that we live in. So the traditional social environment was declared by the Constitutional Court in its resolution from 2 years ago to be a constitutional value that is to be protected at all times at any price. When the fundamental law of Hungary came into force in 2012, the most disputed resolution was the so-called so-called R resolution, which says, and I'm quoting literally, well, the constitutional law or the fundamental law must be understood in the context of our national tradition and legal history. And we try and interpret, well, the modern society under the conditions that were characteristic of a past society, and that doesn't seem to make sense. However, if we have a deeper look, we realize that there are certain things that do not change and have not changed. 800 years ago, well, those who formulated the Golden Bull tried to actually enshrine rights for themselves against those who exercised power. It's no different today, but to us it's now obvious because we live under rule of law. So it's constitutional law that enshrines all of the rights against the exercising of power by the state. So the fundamental law grew into a kind of constitutional system that everyone can use as a reference point when they have a clash with the interests of the state. And please allow me to spend some more time on something that was touched upon before. As I said before, it's the fundamental law that enshrines the fundamental rights we can reference when getting in conflict with the interests of the state. As I also hinted, as carefully as the law might be written, it will not work without properly trained and experienced exercises of those rights. And I asked the Constitutional Court about what they think the Golden Bull sends as a message to the constitutional judges of the 21st century and what they see as the essence of being a constitutional judge and of constitutional work in general. Then also surprisingly to me, every interviewed colleague actually immediately said exactly the same, which was control or overpower. So that's the essence of our work and our existence. So at this point, I could even stop my presentation because I am not going to be able to say anything more important than this later either, because of course the Golden Bull also served rights against the ruling power. So the parallel is so simple, it almost sounds childish, because of course the Constitutional Court is a limitation to power, it defends basic rights, the independence of judges, the powers of local governments, and safeguards the interest of the country at important points in history, like our accession to the European Union. And beyond that, it did protect and does protect the environment, the living conditions of future generations, and it also laid down the basic concepts of constitutional identity. So the Constitutional Court must make decisions in core subjects that represent the living fiber of society and determine that fiber. However, in that process, since the entry into force of the fundamental law, there are also other factors to be considered. Our historical constitutions and our historical findings and the achievements of the past 800 years. And when the Constitutional Court first tried to interpret Act 33 per 2012 on the core concepts of the fundamental law, they said the following. When the constitutional law, the fundamental law, opens a window to the world of public operation, it also highlights the legal history without which our culture and the constitutional system would not have any roots. And the responsibility of the Constitutional Court in this situation consideration in outstanding, we could say historical. So any historical assessment must be lifted into a historical context and quote the relevant historical sources. So I believe that when in terms of constitutional order and state order, everything is relativized, it's very important to ensure that our legal culture does not become something that has no roots. So it's very important that it should show values, the Golden Bull should show values not only to professionals. We have, for example, the Golden Bull Theatre, at least we organized such a program last year, which tells the story of Andrew II, the Golden Bull, in an easy-to-understand way. And before their visit, the authors tried to figure out what happened to the 7 original copies of the Golden Bull before they all disappeared. And I'm not going to tell you the outcome. I don't want to deprive you of the possibility to find it out yourself. They believe that the first and foremost carrier of national identity is language, but it's not the only one. I believe that Hungary is also very rich in national symbols that represent its national identity. First of all, I would mention the coat of arms of Hungary, which is not unique in the sense that, of course, all countries have their own relevant coats of arms. But we also have the so-called wonder stag that is also something that reinforces our national identity. But I could mention the 15th of March or the 20th of August, the double cross, the two-rule bird, the sacred right hand, etc., etc. And I could go on. But today, the day goes to the Golden Bull. And ladies and gentlemen, the Golden Bull is the starting point of the development of constitutionality in Hungary. And it's not by coincidence that when they announce their resolutions, judges actually wear the golden coins that symbolize this. And the message the Golden Bull sends is much more diverse than a reference point of constitutional law. It's a symbol. It's a symbol of exercising constitutional law, and it's a very important national symbol in the same way as our fundamental law. It's a symbol of the fact that where there is homeland, there is also law, and a real homeland can only exist where there is law. It's also a symbol of the fact that the exercising of public power must have limitations, and the existing social order must be protected, and those who exercise power must be at all times accountable to the nation. One good example of this is in Europe, where decisions are often made or power is exercised without reference to nation states and without the consideration of their individual rights and considerations. Well, when we pass decisions that have an influence on our communities and nations, it's our obligation arising from our identity to open a window towards the public law aspects of those decisions. Our predecessors fought for centuries for constitutional rights, and I also wish to draw your attention to the institutional law history that offer solid foundations to today's provisions and also give firm guidance to shaping the future. The last words of our fundamental law carry a clear message: let there be peace, freedom, and agreement. Thank you for listening to me.
First, by all means, I'd like to thank Dr. Tamás Solyok for this very interesting presentation, but also not only the presentation, but I believe his role, role he played in publishing this book. Next to speak is Professor Dr. János Martonyi. His speech is going to be Hungarians in Europe from the Golden Bull to this day. He is a member of the Board of Trustees of the Friends of Hungary. I'd like to cordially and respectfully greet everybody. The most important things have been said. So I would just like to highlight in order to adhere to time, I'd just like to highlight two things. And if there was any repetition, I'd like to beg your apology. First of all, initially, I thought this conference or even the title would be The Golden Bull and What Came After. Well, I'd like to talk about what came after, because much mention has been made of the Golden Bull, and much mention is made in this wonderful publication that our president introduced, and the closing part written by the president of the Constitutional Council Court. So, after all this, I'd just like to highlight that what came after it, the historic constitution of Hungary would not have evolved the way it did were it not for the Golden Bull. The story itself is, of course, older than 800 years. It's at least 1,000 years, actually, because it was mentioned that the crown was donated by the Pope, but the historic constitution actually at the same time is requires two important statements of fact. One is in terms of Hungarian legal evolution, in terms of Hungarian history, in terms of Hungarian culture. This is quite an outstanding achievement. We could say that our historic constitution, which we know is both written and undocumented, a mixture of these two. So this historic constitution, I believe, is a condensed expression of our national identity. And it is not only that, it's also, in general, if you look in terms of European and universal constitutional development, well, it is definitely a wonder of that as well. Perhaps not the only wonder of constitutional development, but definitely I can state that there is no other historic constitution that is so deeply Hungarian, that reflects our essence so truthfully, but at the same time is linked in 1,000 different ways to European and to universal evolution. So there's two statements that I'd like to, if you wish, substantiate here. I'll admit to you honestly that this was my intent above all. The first statement that I had already alluded to earlier is that the whole evolution of our historic constitution was undividedly linked and related to European developments. Interaction means that the Hungarian historic constitution was a factor that influenced the evolution of constitutions. Well, we have quite a few concrete examples for it in Central Europe, but in the whole of Europe. So European constitutional development would have been completely different without the Hungarian historic constitution. I promised that I would cite one or two statements, and then perhaps it would be worth mentioning a few other arguments that might substantiate my statement. The first statement has to do with restriction of power. The Golden Bull, everybody knows. In general, that is what we know if you're asked about the Golden Bull, the right of resistance. But indeed, the restriction of power is in itself carrying a very interesting, very unique Hungarian character to it, and also a European and universal character to it. Let's start with the universal one. Platon, Aristoteles, Saint August, Reformation period. And of course the division of power, the different branches of power, John Locke, Montesquieu, and the list goes on. But there's also a Hungarian character, the Golden Bull, Verbőci, because the tripartite book is not always mentioned here, but indeed one of the most important messages of Verbőci's laws was that I am going to restrict the power of the crown, and in this sense I am going to restrict it in the interest of the Hungarian noble men. And of course, there is this other thing that we nowadays call the institution of co-decision in Europe. Every law will be only applicable if the crown or the crown and the parliament approves it. If either approval is missing, it is null and void. That is a Hungarian specific character to this evolution. But if you think further of the division of power, well, a substantial part of Hungarian history is about this. Bocskai, Bethlen, Veselényi's plot. And of course we know 1687, we concede, give up our right of resistance, but it did not stop Rákóczi from actually delivering his famous speech in Munkács. I remember this was on the side of the Rákóczi statue, so every day going to school I could read it, excerpts of that famous speech. Well, he actually refers to Article 31 of the Golden Bull, which means Hungarian history carried forward the right of resistance. And then you had the notion of public good appearing, but of course the fundamental issue being that power has to be restricted this way or that way. One would be the separation of powers, and of course forcing them to cooperate in some way. And of course the fundamental issue is how this restriction of power is actually done in the interest and in the name of public good. This is unchanged. And there's this other important tenet which says, which is about sovereignty, independence, the freedom from others. It actually appears very early on during the evolution of the historic constitution. It is basically indivisible from the science of the Holy Crown. Janusz Liński said that the Holy Crown is or means at the same time that we have entered into Respublika Christiana, into the community of Christian nations, that with the gifting of the crown, the Hungarian king is elevated to be an equal member or an equal partner in the line of other European crowns. But this crown means something more. The Holy Crown itself means that, and this is what Janusz Linsky used this word, that this is nothing but a personification of a formal manifestation of our sovereignty. Legality meets with legitimacy, and the two together actually then result in something very specifically Hungarian, a very specific Hungarian contribution to the history of the Constitution. And of course, if we continue this listing, because we have talked about the tripartite laws, you have the Pragmatica Sanctio, a few hundred years, of course, again, a leap of few hundred years into the future. 1713. It was much ahead of its age. It's no coincidence that during the debates on the debate basically on the conciliation, DEAC referred to the Pragmatica Sanctio, because it stipulated that this country was independent and that this country had its own political system of institutions. And of course, the Pragmatica Sanctio also admits that this country belongs to a larger unit because it is in the interest of basically asserting its interest better and more efficiently in the world, being part of this larger, greater framework. So all this already appears in the Pragmatica Sanctio. And of course, we have the laws from 1848. First, you have civil liberties, public burden sharing, rights of the nobility taken away, all kinds of other liberties. In general, it's basically nothing but what we would call today a modern state of the rule of law. Those laws actually had it all, and it's no coincidence that beside Pragmatica Sanctio for Ferenc Dávid were the laws of 1848. And of course, then you come to a moment, an especially interesting element, which is 1867, law number 12 of the year. This is the law that discusses the reconciliation that ensured the independence of the country, autonomy of the country, and also at the same time provided for the possibility for us to function, operate in a larger framework, to be able to assert our security interests more efficiently as part of this greater framework. The third paragraph, it's worth mentioning. It has to do with the constitutional public law and constitutional independence of Hungary in completeness. This law has another paragraph, paragraph 5, which is less cited. It talks about the king, the ruler, who grants constitutional right for other political units of the monarchy, where before the crown used to have absolute rights. And I think this is something worth mentioning, worth emphasizing for us, that this whole Hungarian reconciliation played a very decisive role in that not only Hungary was granted a constitutional system, but all other political units of the monarchy were allowed to introduce constitutional systems with a bit of bias, I could say. Of course, it's because of us. Of course, there were other factors, but without the Hungarians, without the Act number 12 of 1867, this would not have happened. This is why I believe that Act number 12 of 1867 was decisive in terms of the fate of Central Europe and actually impacted the whole of Europe. It is quite popular nowadays. It's often, a lot of talk is being made of how we should actually compare the monarchy system with the present European EU system. I would not go into that. But one thing is for sure here. Our independence, beside maintaining our constitutional system, you still had towards the outside the acceptance of being part of a greater structure and therefore basically protecting our security this way. There are two ways to do that. One is through foreign policy. It's evident. And of course, the other one being very significant, and that's the joint defense force. The joint, we could use the contemporary word, common security and foreign policy. I mean, there is no other no better expression that they managed to come up with. So Act number 12 of 1867 actually uses the word in this way, so no further thought is required. It's a separate cup of tea that very little advances have been made in the field of common security and foreign policy, but perhaps at least the realization is there that indeed, especially in light of the global events, that this is also important, almost as important as the shared currency, as the shared internal market, and other things that we might sometimes over-exaggerate. It is also about the need for this unity to act together in the world and, if need be, to actually possess the tools that help Europe to protect herself. Well, all this is not mentioned in the Golden Bull verbatim this way, but it's a fact that our historic constitution actually is, if you wish, present through the whole European evolution, and I dare to say that the European constitutional development would have been completely different without the Hungarian historic constitution. And the story goes on. And this would be the topic that I would have discussed, but I will not. Perhaps on a next occasion. We were discussing this a few days ago with President Suyok in a public session. So what's the situation now? That's the question. How are we able to ensure this internal independence in terms of self-government? How are we able to recognize it with the norms of a larger unit? How do we reconcile European law with Hungarian law, which in itself is, of course, a very interesting question. Of course, our historic constitution, and now we go back to the Golden Bull, I believe, actually also provides guidance on these issues as well. And it's no coincidence. I mean, most probably this has been mentioned as well, but our fundamental law actually has a very important stipulation that when it comes to interpreting, it's not only the purpose, it's not only the national avowal, but also the historic constitution that has to be used as a basis. And the Constitutional Court has, I think, cited at least on a dozen occasions, separate occasions, the historic constitution. I don't know the exact numbers and I couldn't summarize it precisely. Probably the president of the Constitutional Court would be a better place to do that. It just goes to mean that the historic constitution is alive. It's there in our our own system in the European integration as well. We have this surplus that is, on the one hand, Hungarian, that is, on the other hand, European, and also universal. And this is what should be remembered. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for those valuable thoughts. When we are discussing topics like this, the Res Publica Christiana, the Saint Crown, or the fact as to how Hungary and the Hungarian nation became a member in a European community, then inevitably we start thinking about a number of different things, and they also show how topical this subject is and how topical it is to rethink the messages of the Golden Bull. So I wish to really thank Mr. János Martonyi for his valuable thoughts. Our next speaker will be Professor Dr. László Trócsányi, whose presentation will be titled Our Universities as the Cornerstones of Our Constitutional Heritage. László Trócsányi, former director of the Institute of International and Regional Studies, former Hungarian ambassador to Brussels and Paris, research professor at the Faculty of Law and Political Science of the Károly Gáspár Reformed University, previous professor at the Szeged University, European MP, and president of the Hungarian Association of Lawyers. So I'd like to ask Mr. László Trócsányi to deliver his speech. Thank you. Thank you very much, honorable ladies and gentlemen. As János Martonyi said, all the most important things have already been said. So it's even more true for the person who comes after him, but I'll try and do my best. It was in the year 2000 that, thanks to János Martonyi, I was sent to Belgium as an ambassador. So what does an ambassador do? Well, he or she collects a circle around him. So I created this circle of professors, Belgian professors. The name of Sándor Lánfalussy was mentioned, but I could mention János Fürling, Gyula Deutsch, many. They were all scientists, excellent specialists, all working at universities. And they all had French wives, or Francophone wives, rather. So they really enjoyed themselves when they came to me in the evening because they could chat in Hungarian. But what did we chat about? We chatted about our identity and what it is that holds us together, where we came from, where we are heading. So all core issues that have to do with self-identity. We could even say quasi-constitutional self-identity, because the idea was to determine who we are, what it is that holds us together, what our shared experiences are, and history, including the Golden Bull, also plays a part in it. So we have a shared pool of memories, but we also need to have a shared project. So when you talk about university people, so what is the topic? Universities. So that's why I chose universities as the topic of my lecture today, to show you how science, education, and universities themselves form part of our constitutional system. If you look at the geographical position of Hungary, we cannot say that we have large seas or mountains like Switzerland. We cannot claim that we are particularly rich in minerals. But what we can say is that when it comes to scientific minds, Hungary is indeed doing well. And one part of self-identity is to consider science and education to be important. And if we look through history, we can say that indeed Hungarian scientists reached some important milestones. Just to mention the safety match, the ballpoint pen, helicopters, COVID vaccine, the development of nuclear reactors, and I could go on and on to list the scientific achievements realized by Hungarian scientists. So I must say that our universities have great responsibility in talent care and in looking after local institutions of higher education. And let's not forget that Hungarian youngsters always moved around. The first university was actually founded in 1367 Union, and it was actually established by Pope Urban V, who approved the charter of the University of Pest to King Louis the Great. And they traveled around Europe, the students, to Prague, Krakow, Vienna, Bologna, and Paris, and Hungarian youngsters went to study to these places. And later, starting from 1635, when we established the predecessor of the Eötvös Loránd University, so from there on we started building universities, and it was not long ago that the 440th anniversary of the establishment of the Szeged University was celebrated. So Hungarian youngsters traveled around to different universities. They used their own money to get to Paris, Padua, Heidelberg, and other universities, and then they try to come back with the knowledge acquired. So in my view, teaching the freedom of learning, the preservation and transmission of culture represent milestones of the Hungarian constitutional heritage. Debate and challenging each other's positions always had a positive impact on our scientific life. Our historical constitution always enshrined the right to learning and the constitutional freedom of education, seeing it as a fundamental right. I missed out some famous scientists like Ignác Semmelweis, Loránd Eötvös, but I could go on, Albert Szent-Györgyi, who discovered vitamin C. And Hungary so far actually gave 17 Nobel Prize winners to the world. We must also see that this academic freedom and scientific freedom was broken during the years of communism, and I don't doubt that even during that period we had excellent scientists, good results. However, the Iron Curtain closed the possibility for Hungarian scientists to show their knowledge abroad. It was difficult to get to foreign countries. It was difficult to participate in international projects. It was indeed a difficult period. And we who are part of this generation know only too well what it means to have to research or teach behind the Iron Curtain and the compromises we had to make in this period. Luckily, we can say that we managed to part and say goodbye to this world at the time of the regime change. We had high hopes when we started walking the path of European integration. We were absolutely certain that our universities would be absolute winners of this process. I personally won a scholarship in Rome and in Belgium as a result, and many Hungarian teachers, professors saw the world open up to them, and the scientific life as a result could be renewed. We had an exchange of researchers, professors, allowing us to start high-quality research and educational work between different European universities. Through these relationships, we learned that we could build on each other and contribute our own knowledge to joint successes. Let me mention just a few of my personal findings. At the Szeged University of Sciences, after the regime change, we launched a significant Francophone educational project with the Jean Trio University, and now we are working together with Lili Sziaszpo. And I must say now that we have French students with French nationality obtaining diplomas in Szeged. So a new life started after the regime change, and we must also understand that the Erasmus programs were also very helpful. And in Hungary, we had 4,892 students receiving Erasmus scholarships in Europe a couple of years ago. That's quite a few, almost 5,000. So when we talk about Europe, how can we say that Europe values us? There are, of course, dispute settlement forums, but students find it not so easy to understand. What they understand is that we can sit in a car and drive all the way to Paris without being stopped. And it's also clear to them that they can get an Erasmus scholarship and go to study at a European university. And this is what brings through the message and brings young generations close to the concept of Europe. So these are the developments that have been, and still are important to young people. And to come back to a more topical issue, Hungary introduced a model change in the management of universities, offering more room for maneuver and more autonomy to universities. And the reinforcement of university autonomy and increasing the number of students on a competitive basis were main targets. And the different forums, supported the model change, and even those who initially doubted the model welcomed the project. And the persons who were dedicated to the different universities, like myself to the Szeged University, do not want to limit the autonomy of the universities. We try and help and contribute to establishing the autonomy of university. That's our job, to support universities whilst 100% respecting the autonomy of the universities. And it really came as a bolt light out of the blue that EU politicians suspended the Erasmus program for the students and professors of the universities. They also stalled the participation of Hungarian researchers in the EU Horizon program, including some winning applications. For us, this decision is incomprehensible and unacceptable. Universities do not manage the funds coming from the Erasmus or Horizon programs. There are independent central agencies managing these funds along the strict criteria enshrined in the subsidy agreements. So the new system actually punishes the people who have no actual influence on the utilization of these monies. As we say locally, the European Union is shooting itself in the foot, and it needs to do a lot of explanation to students and professors. These measures are seen as of purely political value, and the relevant stakeholders are disappointed by the European decision makers, to whom real decision making meant something else than what we saw behind the Iron Curtain. And it is true that these measures have a major impact on, for example, the rankings, the number of students that come to Hungary, so they all have a negative impact on university life, including professors who are researchers or want to participate in projects, and they also have to do a lot of explaining to students. But I very much trust and hope that sooner or later, hopefully sooner rather than later, an agreement will be reached. And finally, please allow me to say a few words as an MP. I have witnessed the widening gap between the treaties and the day-to-day politics of Europe. The equality of member states is a fine principle, but reality and life show otherwise. The European Commission has discretion to decide which country to take legal action against for alleged breaches of EU law. So even if a country claims that other countries also apply similar solutions in other countries, the EU institutions make their decisions on the basis of political correctness criteria. So there is no question of equality between member states, although that is enshrined in the documents of the European Union. The law based on objective and abstract rules and the legal culture that has developed over the centuries, as the 800-year-old Golden Bull is a clear testimony of, is incomprehensible to such European procedures. Thank you very much for your honorable attention. I also wish to cordially thank you for your presentation and for the fact that as a rector and representative of academic life, you showed us how universities, academic life and students bring Europe close together and how they enforce Europe. And that attitude is an important attitude to us today, and I'm very grateful for you highlighting this factor in your presentation. So thank you very much.
A change of genre. Allow me to present to you an excerpt from the film Bánkban. It is an honor for us to welcome here Eva Marton, the globally renowned opera singer. She is perhaps the best portrayer of Gertrudis of Mirania. Melinda is played by Andrea Rost. Otto is played by Dénes Gulyás. Much of the scenes were shot in original settings, locations. The premiere was in 2003. Vilmos Zsigmond was the cameraman and Csaba Kál, the director. The Hungarian Millennium Band is directed by Mátyás Antal.
Szép úrnőm, szemed kék, mint ne felejts az ajkad rózsa, rabszolgától ez udvarlást fogad. Tűrd kegyesen, hogy kísérőd legyek.
Herceg, szemem könnyezek, elvakít-e pompa engem. Nagy kitüntetés, neked a hercegi kögy, csak hallgat szép szavába, légy bátor és köves. Én már hit veszed a tyúk, hogy jönne már, de sírkest megtorolja.
Thank you. And to conclude the day, we have asked István Fodor to speak, who prepared the speech, Friends of Hungary. He's a member of the Board of Trustees, founder, and former president of Ericsson Hungary. He's also a founding member of the Széll-Kálmán Foundation, Széchenyi Prize winner, electric engineer, one of the founder and later president of the Hungarian European Business Council. He was a member of the EU Research Council from 2004 to 2007 and the recipient of the Hungarian Order of Merit. Thank you very much. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to cordially greet you all. The title, Friends of Hungary, it's no coincidence that I used a small letter for important, high-quality academic presentations that we've heard. And of course, quite naturally, like you, I have a myriad of questions. So some of the questions that I raise, I'll try to respond myself, but they're poetic also. They are directly related or indirectly related to the topic of this conference. Let's start with the first question. Can we expect Brussels to celebrate or to deal with the 800-year-long role of the Golden Bull in legal history in a way that merits its significance? It could be expected, but it's even to hope is futile, despite the fact that the presentations we've heard, the speeches we've heard, have provided ample evidence that would justify European celebration of this significant jubilee. Or would it be an unjustified expectation? Well, you respond to it. Second question is, over and beyond this insensitivity, today we have heard references to Europe being in trouble. What could one of the greatest troubles be for Europe? During the past 2 decades, the community of values, at least at the level of management, the control, has become a community of interests. A practical significance of this transformation is that administration has become a tool of interests and influence. The community of national interest is overwritten by other ideals, and Europe's political and economic force is on the decline. Unfortunately, the rhythm of these processes is faster than the strength of the reaction that you see surface during democratic elections. Of course, more and more international experts are dealing with these issues at the international level. Third question, what should we do with the statement? In fact, the statement that we, a few days ago, heard in the show Hard Talk when he was interviewing the Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade. The reporter said, "The West is fed up with Hungary." What can you do with such a statement? Should it be taken seriously? I've had the honor to actively and for several years contribute to the European access process of Hungary actively. And of course, the issue was asked many times, how will life change when Hungary becomes a member of the European Union? I have to say, if somebody would have forecasted the present situation, he would have laughed at it. In the first decade of our membership, I had the honor of serving the Union directly, and you could already feel a double standard between the East and West that, for me, was definitely food for thought. Essentially, we forgot about the phenomenon of the two-speed Europe, because the difference in terms of development is starting to disappear, while double standards have become more varied and have become stronger. Coming back to Hard Talk, it is highly questionable that all the Western societies would be fed up with Hungary. Looking at and analyzing the present specific circumstances in Hungary, I think the biggest problem in Brussels is with the two-thirds that they have never explicitly articulated. Which I have to mention here is that this is a result of a weak opposition. It is a series of unfounded, unjustified accusations that Hungarians have to face since 2010. As Szilveszter Vizi has said, that the Friends of Hungary Foundation was created to actually bring together the Hungarians of the world in order to garner truth and appreciation for Hungary and the Hungarians. Let's see what we do to realize this. So that's the fourth question. Is there any reality in that the Friends of Hungary Foundation could improve the image of Hungarians and Hungary in the world? Can we tame, to some extent, the dominant media of the world? It would indeed be difficult but not hopeless task. I believe any success on this front has multiple, an increased value. Our foundation was created to provide correct information, correct image about Hungary in order to counter the defamatory articles about Hungary. We selected as our members Hungarians who live in the world, who are opinion leaders, key personalities in economy and cultural life. Beside the international successes of Hungarians, we supply credible information to them. Of course, we want to also inform those who do not speak Hungarian, and this is why we have created the Hungary Today news portal, which has been a market leader. It has the German language sister publication Ungarn Heute, which has become an important source, exceeded 120,000 followers. The editor-in-chief is Dr. Daniel Deme, who is the moderator of this day. In total, we reach more than 1 million people on the different channels of the foundation. Besides the news portal, we are organizing conferences. We will have and quarterly newsletter and magazine. Truth be said, what concerns anti-Hungarian official prejudice, well, we are not in an easy situation. It is very difficult to achieve any correction. There's a great struggle. Fifth question is, what is the reason for this struggle? Well, it is the ignorance of facts. That's the simplest response. It's been said today that facts don't really matter. If we try to use facts to negate unfounded statements, so if we want to negate unfounded statements, the media will simply not publish the correction. They are not preoccupied with facts. This is why we have organized on several occasions an international conference for international journalists called Hungary at First Sight. We actually invite journalists who are against, who actually are in, who form an opinion that is anti-Hungarian. It is very interesting when you call these journalists to Hungary, to visit Hungary, and they are confronted with the facts. 2 days, 15, 20 journalists who often conduct very successful and very exciting dialogues. Many people return with an opinion that has changed to the one before they arrived. There's the question, what is life like in Hungary? Many people sitting here in the room will be able to respond to this. For me, it tells a tale that during the past years we've seen a lot of Hungarian families move back home, and even more European families have moved over to Hungary. So there is a large number of families that have left before the 90s. Many of them actually are these remigrants, are members of ours as well. They are, we call them re-migrants, on the analogy of emigrants. and we cooperate with them quite often. If you are interested in what they do, what life is like in Hungary, you should ask them. Question before last. Why did the Friends of Hungary Foundation find it necessary to publish this Jubilee publication, Golden Bull? When we decided to publish this Decretum of Hungarianness, we, beyond wanting to present the way the Aranybulla was written, what it contained, and the original Latin text, we also wanted to present its impact on latter times. It really offers a journey for readers through history. In accordance with the mission of the foundation, we have prepared this bilingual publication so that members can tell the world, can present to the world this event of European significance in terms of legal development, the pride of our nation. Last question. Does Hungary have friends? At the individual level, it is impossible to say because there could be a great number of friends. But at the level of countries, of course, the situation is different. Friendships between nations could be at the level of society or at the level of official politics. It is not always the case, but these two groups tend to be the same. There are honest, open friendships, there are unsaid, unstated friendships, and of course all the others are neutral or opposed. In present tumultuous times, it could be a very exciting study to basically name the friendly countries of Hungary during the past 2 decades. I'm hopeful that by now we are seeing an increase in the number of countries where sympathy is turning into more and more open friendship. I would turn to the members of the diplomatic corps, ambassadors, your excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, or members of parliament. Please allow me to ask you to help increase the number of the Friends of Hungary. And you are asked to please use this book. It is actually downloadable on our website, hoping for your assistance and thanking you for your attention, Armenians.
Thank you very much, István Fodor, for your very topical and fact-rich presentation. And thank you very much for appreciating Hungary heute and Hungary Today, our main portal. And I actually paid special attention to the last call on everyone. Please increase the number of Hungary's friends. We thank you for that very much. We need that. And finally, in conclusion, soon I'm going to pass the floor to the President, but if I may just borrow the book for one moment. This is the book that brought us together here today. You can look at it at the table outside the door, and you can also take a copy with you each. We are at a fortunate moment when we have here the authors of the book, Ferenc Kolin, Jenő Smody. Thank you. And last but not least, Judith Merkel-Santo. And before I pass the floor to the President, indeed, please let me still the moment a little bit. And I didn't write down any speeches to make it more heartfelt. This document that we put together in this book is not just down to the professionalism, but also to the humanity of Judith. This book wouldn't look as it does without Judith adding her heart and energy to it. So thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen,
azt hiszem, hogy
I believe
rendkívüli
that
eseménynek lehettünk.
we have been able to witness an extraordinary event.
A 800 éves aranybullát, annak
The
jelentőségét,
800-year-old Golden Bull, its significance,
hanem jövőnkre nézve
and
megtárgyaltuk.
its impact for our past and future, well, these were all discussed today. And I am convinced that the Friends of Hungary is actually doing a good service by doing so. So I wish to deliver a heartfelt thank you to the presenters for their outstanding presentations of scientific value. And I am convinced that these presentations must be published separately
Hiszen
in a book,
összegezi azt,
as
ami a
they
magyar
summarize
jogtörténet, a magyar alkotmányosság
the
egész
essence
napjainkig, sőt,
of Hungarian
nyugodtan
legal
mondhatom, a
history
jövőt
and
illetően
constitutionality.
dekrétumáról szól.
So it's an important
Hölgyeim és
decretum
uraim, köszönöm, hogy
of all
eljöttek,
that.
hogy megtiszteltek.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming and for honoring us with your participation. Your Excellencies, the Madame Ambassadors and the Ambassadors, and who realized that there is a small nation in Central Europe in terms of population, commercial or political power. It's not a great power. But in many areas, it is indeed a great people, a great nation. And we are proud to be its sons and daughters. I must also say, that was not mentioned before, that the Friends of Hungary have members who are not necessarily of Hungarian origin, but also people who used to be ambassadors here. I could name in person 3 former ambassadors of the United States who also support us financially. But I could also mention those who live in different parts of the world across 5 continents and support us. They support what this small nation has contributed to the world's heritage in arts, music, sciences, sports. And as I said before, they gave a lot to Christianity. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.